For the next half hour until Black Sabbath went on stage, the tension became unbearable. Ozzy paced, drank orange juice, and smoked cigarettes. Ozzy, dressed in a yellow satin costume with purple fringe, and combed his hair no less than 5 times. All right, today we are going to continue our Ozzy Osbourne Black Sabbath theme, and I got to tell you, what I have for you today, I am so excited about. You know, I do a lot of research for this channel. We read old newspapers and periodicals and magazines and books, and I'm just hoping that every single week we can maybe come up with 1 or 2 like really interesting things. And then every once in a while I come across something that is truly special. And I think what I have for you here today is that. So what this is there was a concert, a Black Sabbath concert that was happening on February 9th of 1974 in the Spectrum in Philadelphia. And what happened, there's this guy named Stephen Gaines who spent 2 hours with Ozzy basically as he got ready for the concert all the way up to the moment that he got up on stage. And it's not like there's any big revelations in this or anything. It's just that there's all these little things of what's going on behind the scenes and what Ozzy acts like in these moments. And it is just so interesting to listen to this. And so I'm just going to read this to you. The first thing I'm going to show you before we get into the article is just an advertisement for the actual concert. I always find these things kind of interesting. So this was published on February 3rd of 1974. So this is about, 6 days before the concert. And you'll see over here on the left-hand part of the screen, you'll see this full advertisement that includes Johnny Winter, Chicago, but then right there in the middle is the ad for Black Sabbath. And I'll just give it a little closer here. So it says right there, Saturday, February 9th, dance concert with Black Sabbath, Black Oak, Arkansas, Bedlam, and it's $5.50 in advance and $6 at the door. Okay. Now, one other thing that's kind of interesting that I'm always curious sometimes when we read these things, if these places that these concerts took place still stand. And it turns out that the Spectrum in Philadelphia apparently was torn down back in 2009, 2010, and the last people to play there apparently was on October 31st, 2009. It was Pearl Jam. Anyway, so the place that we're talking about right here. Okay, again, I think you're really going to enjoy this. This is from the Daily News, April 14th, 1974, and this is published in New York. And it just music scene, and the title of this article is 2 Hours in the Life of a Groupie by Stephen Gaines. Okay. In the old days of rock and roll, a groupie was a person with a single-minded purpose to bestow sexual favors on rock stars. In modern rock and roll, groupies come in all different brands and varieties, with as many different reasons for being groupies as there are rock stars to group. Now, that, by the way, is so interesting because it starts out with this idea in the old days of rock and roll. I mean, here's 1974. And for me, if you throw the word groupies out, I'm thinking the old days are 1974. Like, that's really old days. But apparently, something like this goes way, way, way back. So anyway, that was just kind of an interesting thing to see. Okay. Some groupies are just zealous fans who spend their lives dreaming from afar and never make it to first base. Some, like Linda McCartney, grow up and marry their rock stars. Some, like Faye Dunaway with Peter Wolf, are stars themselves. Some groupies need only to breathe the same electric air as their idols to obtain satisfaction, while some need total physical possession. Some groupies even work in the music business to legitimize themselves, getting jobs as publicists and talent scouts. Some become writers. With the excuse that I was doing it for all the would-be groupies who would never get the chance themselves, I spent a recent evening glued to the side of a rock star just before a sold-out performance at Philadelphia's massive Spectrum Arena. My subject was a groupie's delight, Black Sabbath's Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy, 24, is the lead singer of a very rich, very loud, not very talented, super famous English rock band. Like most of the wonderful inconsistencies of rock and roll, you don't have to be good to be big. And Black Sabbath's enormous popularity testifies to that. Their music is called heavy metal rock. a loud, droning sound good to listen to only while banging your head against the wall. Their lyrics are flavored with a strong dose of adolescent Satanism, hence the name Black Sabbath. 3 years ago, in a kind of nuclear reaction, they exploded onto the music scene, capturing the imagination and hearts of American youth, along with several million of their dollars. 5 out of 5 Black Sabbath albums have sold over 1 million copies each. By 1971, tremendous public demand brought them to the United States for 8 tours in 1 year. Then the group suddenly vanished in a mysterious, self-imposed seclusion. Now, also to put this in context then, the album that they would be touring on here is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. And that came out in November of 1973. And when it says suddenly vanished in a mysterious self-imposed seclusion, what happened is they'd put out basically those 4 albums, Black Sabbath Volume 4 was the one prior to this. And after that tour, they were just absolutely exhausted. And by the time they went into the studio, they were basically all looking to Tony like, okay, what's next? Let's do some recording. And if you listen to Tony's book, he talks about this time where he felt a little bit of the pressure that he needed to be coming up with these riffs because everybody expected them. And they also were feeling a little bit of exhaustion. First of all, they were just worn out from the tour, and they were the making of an album was starting to become a little bit humdrum. And so this whole thing, he was not really sure what to record. They ended up recording in a couple different places. And finally, when they finally settled on where they were going to be, they ended up coming up with what Tony Iommi thinks is kind of the pinnacle of their recording. And if you listen to Tony Iommi's book, he says this, at Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, he felt like they'd reached their peak. And he says the next time they did something he thought was that good was when they did Heaven and Hell with Dio. Anyway, just wanted to put that in context. Here we are in 1974. This is on the Sabbath Bloody Sabbath album tour. Okay, here we go. Talking with Ozzy. My evening with Ozzy was set up toward the end of Black Sabbath's first American tour since their reappearance, and fans went wild to get at them, slurping up record albums as fast as they could be pressed and buying out concert halls as soon as tickets were put on sale. Black Sabbath was for big-time groupies only. I first spotted Ozzy loping across the lobby of Philadelphia's Penn Center Hotel. From afar, he looked like a real tough character. But as soon as he started to speak, the hardness melted away, and he seemed vulnerable and shy. He had brooding, childish brown eyes, full lips, and a lovely long haircut, which framed his pouting face. His words came crumbling out of his lips in a nearly impossible Birmingham English accent. Around his neck dangled the famous solid gold Black Sabbath crucifix. Mark Forster, Black Sabbath's tour manager, an older man with a Dutch boy haircut and a red velvet sports jacket, ushered us into an elevator so we could talk in a veritable groupie's paradise, Ozzy Osbourne's hotel room. Well, aspiring groupies, the temporary den of Black Sabbath's favorite lion was no neater than the room of a typical 14-year-old. Several suitcases were strewn around the floor, overflowing with clothing. Sweaters, shirts, and dirty socks lay everywhere. One suitcase held a pair of knee-high silver boots, a copy of Circus Magazine, and a tiny aerosol spray can of painkiller for sore throats. Sitting on the dresser was an expensive portable cassette player, along with a carrying case with several cassettes. Now, wouldn't you love to know what the cassettes were? If these were cassettes of groups, of bands, or if these were cassettes of song ideas or something like that. But anyway, probably bands and things he was listening to. And what Circus Magazine would that have been? Now, by the way, I looked it up, and the Circus Magazine that was out in April of 1974 had Jeff Beck on the cover, just FYI. So who knows? But anyway, it'd be interesting to know what Circus Magazine was Ozzy carrying around with him and reading. Making small talk with a rock star, as every groupie could tell you, is no easy task. Grouping Ozzy Osbourne was much like being a psychiatric nurse. A self-admitted neurotic, Ozzy mumbled constantly and chain-smoked cigarettes, sometimes lighting several at one time. When I asked if he was nervous about the 22,000 people who were already assembling at the Spectrum to see him, he said he would be just as nervous if only a few hundred people were waiting. It was just the waiting he didn't like. His favorite subject was The Exorcist, which Ozzy had seen the night before. He did a stunning imitation of the possessed Linda Blair, complete with the proper profanities. Just as Ozzy was entertaining me with a recap of the movie, Mark Forster knocked on the door and escorted us down into the street where a limousine was waiting. In the back seat were huddled two young girls who had talked the chauffeur into letting them wait for Ozzy. The girls, like me, were groupies, but unlike me, they hadn't had the privilege of an invitation. Ozzy, however, didn't have the heart to throw them out, and the girls were allowed along for the ride. Now, this is so fascinating listening to this, because all the things you hear about, Ozzy being really soft-spoken and how friendly he was and kind of disarming and unassuming, and all that stuff is right here. I mean, he's got these groupies, these girls who just want to be in the limousine, and he just kind of doesn't have the... Anyway, this is so interesting. I love this. As the massive space marshmallow called the Spectrum loomed just before us, the fans ran alongside the limousine for a glimpse of Ozzy inside. Ozzy stared impassively, while the other groupies and I waved and smiled. And you got to also imagine at this point that this is old. They've been doing this for years. And this is old news for them going through this experience. Suddenly, we plunged down a ramp and were discharged in the carefully guarded backstage hallways of the Spectrum. People stared at us as we walked briskly to his dressing room. And I heard a few squeals of delight from fans lucky enough to get near the backstage area and catch sight of Ozzy. The roar of the crowd. For the next half hour until Black Sabbath went on stage, the tension became unbearable. Ozzy paced, drank orange juice, and smoked cigarettes. His English manager, Patrick Meehan, arrived in a floor-length mink coat, which seemed to make everybody even more nervous. Ozzy, dressed in a yellow satin costume with purple fringe, a gift from a groupie, and combed his hair no less than 5 times. Finally, a caller stuck his head in the door. Black Sabbath was on. At Ozzy's side, I rushed down the curving hallways of the Spectrum. Crowds of bystanders separated in waves as we passed by. Flashbulbs popped in our eyes. Above us, there was the sound of monstrous applause, which increased in intensity until the building vibrated. The veins in Ozzy's neck stood out as we reached a gaping entrance onto the floor of the arena. 10 yards away, a ramp led up to the darkened stage. A voice echoed over the loudspeakers, "Black Sabbath! Black Sabbath!" The roar of the crowd turned into a wall of noise. For a moment, I was deaf. Then, living out my wildest fantasies, I raced up the ramp next to Ozzy. A piercing white spotlight picked us out, and for a few short seconds, I felt the emotional swell and adrenaline rush a rock star must feel when 22,000 people are all groupies for you. This was part of the magic of rock and roll. As I strode onto the stage alongside Ozzy, the noise got even louder if that was possible. At the last moment, I ducked behind the amplifiers and hid there for the rest of the show. 3 hours later, in the bar of Ozzy's hotel, the real groupies had taken over. Ozzy was surrounded by fawning admirers, girls and boys asking him about his music and himself. As I passed, I heard him say, "It's not really all that great being a rock star." A young man stared at him in disbelief. "Really," Ozzy continued, "I'd change places with you anytime." But the young man couldn't believe him, and I didn't blame him one bit. And that is the end of the article. And that, my friends, is a gem. That is so fascinating, listening to that just little narrative of the experience of being with Ozzy Osbourne as he's preparing to go on stage and actually going onto the stage. Well, just awesome. And then there's a really, really cool picture of Ozzy right there. Black Sabbath's Ozzy Osbourne, and there's the quote, "It's not really all that great being a rock star." 2 hours in the life of a groupie. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that. This to me, again, finding these little moments like this every once in a while in some of these periodicals, I think is just spectacular. And I hope you enjoyed them too. I'd love to get your feedback on this. If you're not following the channel, please follow the channel. And if you enjoyed this, really, this is one to share with other people. This is so cool. This is so interesting. We really appreciate it when you do share these things with other people. I'd love to get your feedback. Did you see them on this tour? And actually, did you see them on this concert? There's 22,000 of you out there somewhere, and it's interesting how often people comment on these videos like, I was there, I saw that concert. I'd love to hear about what you remember from this experience. And so leave your comments, like the video, follow the channel, share this with other people. We really appreciate that. And with that, have yourself a fantastic day.